The entryway door slammed shut with such a bang that the windows on the staircase rattled. Diane was hurrying home. Her boss had let her off early, and she decided to pick up the children from daycare herself, rather than leaving the task to her mother-in-law. Climbing the steps, she was already imagining hugging Max and Sonia and asking them about their day. But the sounds coming from their apartment made her stop dead in her tracks. Children's crying mingled with the distinct whistle of a belt cutting through the air and a woman's furious shouts. "This wasn't made for you. You eat everything in sight like little pigs. How many times have I told you to stay out of the refrigerator?" Diane's heart skipped a beat. She lunged for the door, fumbling frantically in her purse for her keys. The lock wouldn't give at first, and every second felt like an eternity. The scene that met her eyes when the door finally opened was worse than her most terrible fears. In the center of the kitchen stood Helen, her mother-in-law, with a belt raised high. Max was pressed against the wall, shielding his face with his arm, while little Sonia sat on the floor, sobbing and clutching her reddened leg. "What is going on here?" Diane's voice was so loud that her mother-in-law flinched and spun around. "Ah, you're home," Helen said, showing not a shred of embarrassment. "Look at your little angels. They devoured half a stick of smoked sausage. I bought that for a special occasion." Diane rushed to her children, crouching down in front of Sonia. Red welts were already visible on the little girl's legs. "Mommy, we were just hungry," Max sobbed. "Grandma said we wouldn't get to eat until tonight. How dare you raise a hand to my children?" Diane stood up and turned to her mother-in-law. A fire blazed in her eyes, so fierce that Helen instinctively took a step back. "They were hungry. They're normal, healthy children. And you beat them for a piece of sausage?" "A piece," Helen shrieked. "They devoured 300 rubles worth of sausage. I don't go to all this trouble, pinching pennies and saving, just so these gluttons can eat everything up." "Pinching pennies?" Diane's gaze shifted to her mother-in-law's new blouse and freshly styled hair. "You've never saved a penny at your own expense in your life." "Oh, is that how it is?" Helen threw the belt onto the table. "If you're so smart and I'm so terrible, then you can support your own children from now on. I'm done helping." Just then, a familiar sound came from the hallway. Her husband was returning from work. Andrew appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked around at the scene in confusion. "What happened? Why is everyone shouting?" "Ask your mother," Diane seethed. She was whipping the children with a belt because they were hungry. Andrew looked uncertainly from his mother to his wife. "Mom, what's gotten into you? They're just kids." Kids. Helen stomped her foot. "And who feeds them? Who clothes them? I never see a cent of my own pension. I spend it all on them. And they're so ungrateful, so greedy." Diane felt something inside her snap. For too long, she had tolerated her mother-in-law's whims, her constant complaints about the children about her. For too long, she had pretended not to notice the strange things happening in their home. "You know what, Helen?" she said slowly and clearly. "Let's figure out exactly what you're spending your pension and our money on." She walked to the refrigerator and pulled it open. The shelves were practically bare. A few jars of baby food, a package of pasta, a small piece of cheese. "Where's the food?" Diane asked. "Andrew brought home bags full of groceries just yesterday." "We ate it," her mother-in-law grumbled, her eyes darting nervously. "Ate it?" Diane opened the freezer. "Then where's the meat? The fish? The vegetables?" Andrew walked over to the refrigerator and stared inside in disbelief. "Mom, where are all the groceries? I just bought 5,000 rubles worth yesterday." Helen waved her hand dismissively. "Well, you don't give me any money. So I sell the leftovers to Mrs. Peterson from the third floor. She pays well." Diane felt the blood rush to her face. "You sell our children's food? What's the big deal? You buy too much anyway. More than we need." "More than we need?" Diane's voice grew quiet, a sure sign of a gathering storm. "And why are you feeding the children only once a day?" "It's not just once, eh?" Helen stopped herself. "How many months have you been selling our children's food?" Diane continued. "And where does the money go?" That's my business, Helen snapped. I spend it on the household. What household? Andrew interjected. Mom, where's the money I give you every month for the kids? A heavy silence fell. Helen pressed her lips together and turned to stare out the window. Andrew, Diane said slowly, you give her money? Of course, her husband nodded. $20,000 a month. For the kids' food and their clothes. When was the last time you gave it to her? Andrew thought for a moment. The day before yesterday. No, wait. He scratched his head. It must have been about 2 months ago. 2 months ago? Diane exploded. And where has the money been all this time? Well, you see, I've had some problems at work, Andrew mumbled, his voice getting quieter. A big project got stuck. I wanted to relax a little, play some games. I bought a new computer, upgraded my account. Besides, Mom helps out. She cooks, she watches the kids. Helps out. Diane's voice was like a taut wire. She's starving them and selling their food, don't you understand? Helen whirled around. I'm not starving anyone. I feed them. I just don't let them gorge themselves on everything. You feed them once a day. Diane shouted. And only with leftovers. They're growing children. They'll be fine, her mother-in-law scoffed. In our day, children ate even less. Diane looked at Max and Sonia. The children were thin and pale. She had always attributed it to growth spurts, to how active they were. But now it all made sense. And your pension? She asked her mother-in-law. Where does your pension go? That's none of your business. It's very much my business. You live in our apartment, you eat our food. Our apartment? Helen smirked. The apartment is in my name. I was the one who let you live here. Andrew coughed guiltily. Diane, the apartment really is Mom's. We're just registered as residents. And, because of that, you think you have the right to starve your own grandchildren? Diane pressed on. I'm saving for the future. Helen finally broke. I'm saving for a country house. I need a vacation too. A country house? A wave of fury so intense washed over Diane that her hands began to shake. You're saving for a country house while my children go hungry? At that moment, the neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, appeared at the door, holding a plastic bag. Helen, here is your money for today's groceries. 800 rubles, just as we agreed. She held out the bills, but then, seeing the faces of everyone in the room, she hesitated. Oh, I'm probably interrupting. Not at all. You're right on time, Diane said, turning to the neighbor. Mrs. Peterson, how long has my mother-in-law been selling you groceries? The neighbor looked nervously from Helen to Diane. Oh, for about 4 months now, I think. It's a very good deal. She sells things cheaper than the store. At first, she said you just had a lot of extras, but then she admitted she just needed the money. Money for what? Diane asked. Well, she's saving for a country house. She wants to buy a plot in a garden community. She was just bragging about how much she's already saved up. Diane turned back to her mother-in-law. Helen stood beet red, her eyes fixed on the floor. How much have you saved? Diane demanded. It's none of your business. Oh, it is. Andrew. Diane turned to her husband. How much money have you given her in total? Do the math. Andrew began to count on his fingers. 20,000 a month. We moved in a year ago, but I haven't paid for the last 2 months. So, that's about 200,000. 200,000 rubles of the children's money, Diane said slowly. Plus the food sales at 800 rubles a day, that's another 24,000 a month. Over 4 months, that's almost 100,000. For a total of 300,000 rubles. She stared at her mother-in-law. Where is the money? I spent it, Helen snapped. On what? New clothes? Makeup? Taxis? Just then the phone rang. Andrew answered it. Hello? Yes, this is the Wolf's apartment. What? A shut-off. His face went pale. When? Tomorrow? And how much is the debt? He hung up the phone and looked at his family in a daze. They're shutting off the power tomorrow. We have an overdue utility bill of 43,000 rubles. A dead silence filled the room. Helen, Diane said in a quiet but firm voice. Did you pay the utility bills? I thought you were paying. We pay the rent on the apartment we stay at on weekends to give you a break from the children. This is your apartment, so the utilities are your responsibility. I don't have any money, Helen whimpered. No money. Diane's voice was sharp with rage. What about the 300,000 rubles of the children's money? What about the money from selling their food? I told you, I spend it. On the household, on myself. I have needs, too. Mrs. Peterson coughed delicately. Forgive me for interrupting, but Helen was just bragging to me that she's saved 400,000 for her country house. She said she was going to buy the plot very soon. Diane felt the floor drop out from under her. 400,000 rubles. Money meant for her children. Money that could have fed their family for a year. Money that was desperately needed to pay the bills. Where is your stash? She asked in a voice of steel. What stash? Helen tried to deflect. Don't play games with me, Diane exploded. For half a year, you've been starving my children, selling their food, and not paying the bills. All for your stupid country house. She stormed into her mother-in-law's room, with the others trailing behind her. Diane began to methodically search the closets and dressers, looking under the mattress. You have no right, Helen screamed. This is my room, and those are my children, Diane shot back. In an old suitcase stored on top of a wardrobe, she found a thick envelope. She dumped its contents onto the bed. Banknotes, 5,000s and thousands, spilled out in a fan. Let's count, Diane said, and began to tally the cash. It came to 420,000 rubles. Here it is, she said, showing the money to her husband. The children's money. The money that was supposed to go toward their food, their clothes, their development. And instead, the children went hungry while she saved for a country house. Andrew sank onto a chair, his face ashen. Mom, how could you? Helen tried to justify herself. I didn't know we'd have debts for the utilities, I thought. You thought only of yourself. Diane cut her off. Of your own desires. What about the children? To you, they're just a burden. She took her children by the hand. Max, Sonia, go pack your things. We're leaving. Where are we going? Max asked. To Grandma's house. To my mother's. No one will ever hit you there for being hungry. Diane, wait. Andrew tried to stop her. Let's just figure this out. Calmly. She turned to face him. Your mother has been starving your children for 6 months. Your children. And you spent their money on games and alcohol. What is there to figure out? But I didn't know. You didn't know? Diane laughed without humor. Why didn't you care? Why didn't you ever once ask how the kids were doing, what they were eating, how they were feeling? Andrew was silent. He truly had no answer. An hour later, Diane was in a taxi with the children. In her bag were their documents, their most essential belongings, and 43,000 rubles from her mother-in-law's secret stash, the exact amount of the overdue utility bill. Mommy, are we not going to live with Grandma Helen anymore? Sonia asked. No, sweetie. We won't. What about Daddy? Daddy has to decide for himself who he wants to live with us, or with his mother. The next day, Diane filed for divorce. Through her lawyer, she demanded Helen reimburse the misappropriated funds and pay compensation for the emotional distress caused to the children. The court found her claims to be justified. Helen was forced to return all the money and pay additional compensation. Andrew tried to apologize, promising to change and swearing he would be a better father. But Diane's decision was made. She had believed his promises for too long, hoped for change for too long. 6 months later, after all the legal formalities were settled, Diane and her children moved into a new apartment. Max and Sonia gained weight, their spirits lifted, and they became normal children again, curious, active, and full of life. Helen was left alone in her apartment. The country house was never bought. All the money she had saved went to paying back what she had taken. Andrew visited her occasionally, but their relationship was strained. He blamed her for destroying his family, and she blamed him for not supporting his mother in her time of need. Sometimes, Walking past a playground, Helen would see children playing and remember her own grandchildren. But it was too late. She had realized far too late that by skimping on her family for the sake of her own selfish whims, she had lost the most precious thing of all. And Diane had learned the most important lesson. No one, absolutely no one, has the right to cause her children pain. Not even under the guise of caring for her family.